On today's Mattcast, I talk with BlueRidgeSilverHound, aka Sean, who runs a YouTube channel that focuses on silver coins and precious metals. We talk everything about coins, grading, and even Magic the Gathering. It's coming up next. Welcome back, everyone, to another Mattcast, and today I am joined with not a Magic the Gathering channel, but a coin collectible channel named BlueRidgeSilverHound. He specializes in antique coins and collectibles and precious metals. Hey, how's it going, Sean?
It's going good, man. Thank you for having me. A little bit different direction, but I do share in the passion with Magic as well. So, heck, why don't we just go ahead and do a little crossover into coins and all that great stuff? Believe it or not,
with me.
Yeah, believe it or not, there's a lot of parallels, and I think the collectibles market in general, it kind of puts everything in one boat. So, it'll work out, and I think we'll have a lot to share with not only your audience but mine as well.
Yeah, because they're both collectibles, maybe not in the same sphere, but we both actually do fairly similar things. I mean, apart from the actual topics, but we do keep close attention to the market. A lot of your videos are market updates on coins that are selling on eBay, what the asking prices, what the sold listings are right now, and where some of the coins in your collection, what would you say are the most treasured and sought after?
Well, I can't really speak on the whole market, as a whole, but I do have quite a few coins that I've inherited from my dad. As a matter of fact, it's September, and we lost him 16 years ago. But I had acquired a lot of coins from him, a lot of old silver. There was some gold in there, and this is stuff that we collected back in the 90s and all the way up to his passing in 2005 that I hold very dearly. If I were to kind of like maybe pick out a few coins that I say, or maybe sets, because I've been set building, and that's one of the cool things about this particular hobby is that there's no wrong way to do it. I've been doing a peace dollar set, and I'm working on that right now. It's kind of been like my labor of love. There's a specific grade I'm looking for, and it's like for the people that actually invest in high grade like Magic cards or Pokemon cards, maybe there's a certain grade that they seek out, and then they try and assemble all of that one set, for example. And that's kind of what I'm doing with the peace dollars.
So what exactly are the peace dollars to people who maybe aren't familiar with that exact type of coin?
The peace dollar is simply just a design type. Ironically, it was designed during a time where you had World War I that just kind of wrapped up in the teens, and this particular series, the peace dollar, went from 1921. And it went all the way to 1935. So it's a very short series, but each specific date maybe has a few coins that were minted at different mint facilities. Like here in the US, we have the Philadelphia Mint, which is the major mint that produces a lot of what we call circulation strike coins. And those are coins that are intended to go out into circulation. And that's normally what we would spend to buy our cup of coffee, or in your case, 10 cups of coffee, Matt. But we also have the Denver Mint. We have a San Francisco Mint, and they do kind of like special strikes. They build sets, that are sold on the US Mint website. But we also have a West Point Mint, and they generally handle a lot of the US bullion. So things like silver eagles, gold eagles, things of that nature.
So the bullion ones, are those the ones specifically that will have like eagles or something? Are these the ones that are mostly for like circulation, or these are collectibles only?
The bullion is usually traded as precious metals. So it's whatever the price of silver is right now. And because Because the Silver Eagle is highly regarded as one of the premier types of precious metals, they usually command a much bigger premium above and beyond what the spot price of silver is. Like, for example, if the spot price of silver today through like normal stock trading is $25 an ounce, the Silver Eagles will generally sell for about 30. So there's usually like a $4 to $5 premium. And then if there's like a rare key date, that has a lot lower mintage, those will command much more money. And that's before, you can even grade out silver bullion too, which is kind of crazy. But the prices change depend on whether you sell them raw, which is uncertified or ungraded, or if you got them graded.
Now, obviously the prices will go up substantially if a coin is graded, I imagine.
Yeah. Well, for coin grading, there's a scale. Okay, it goes from 1, which is poor. Yeah, it's like really rough condition. It's been circulated quite a bit, where a lot of the design is worn off, and the perfect grade is 70. And you usually don't see proof 70 or mint state 70, which is for business strike coins. You don't see that kind of grade that often, and it's better reserved for some of the higher quality types of coins and precious metals that are being sold like through the US Mint. So some of the Silver Eagles, generally you'll see those grade out at the highest level, like maybe mint state 68 or proof 68, up to that perfect grade is 70. But very rarely do you see that grade at all, the perfect 70s.
Yeah, like for me, I know nothing, so I'm more than not even an amateur. I'm learning everything from you right now as you're talking about these coins. Do you own actually silver stocks as well? Do you have any ETFs, or do you only mostly carry just your physical silver?
I have never invested in ETFs or any sort of paper variant of silver or gold. I'm kind of like the type of guy that likes tangible investments.
Right.
I like things that I could feel, touch, smell, if that's even a thing. Silver really doesn't have a smell, by the way. I just like to hold the physical form because it enables more trading power, more buying power. It's respective to the value of the US dollar. There's more value in having precious metals compared to the dollar, which that could be a completely different conversation for another day. In terms of the value of the dollar and inflation and
So that brings me on to the gold standard. So do you think so when Nixon actually took the dollar off of the gold standard in the 70s, there was rampant inflation after that, because I think there also was a lot of uncertainty about the value of money, because at the end of the day, it's just trust now, right? It's you trust that it's worth this, and people, they all agree upon its value.
Well, yeah. Well, that's when Nixon decided to scrap whatever was left over of the gold standard, law in 1970 or 71.
Yeah.
It was from that point forward where it was pretty much we were taking the government's kind of like order that this is exactly $1 and that's how it should be treated. Whereas gold standard was kind of on its last legs by the 70s anyways, because the actual final date of the gold standard in the US was 1933.
Yeah.
So at that point you could say, well, gold was worth, say, $500, which would make the value of the dollar at that time 1/500th of the price of gold. There was always that attachment. But after 1971, that went away. So you were kind of taking the government's word for it that, this is $8 worth of buying power without having that backing.
And it was the government spending which actually got them to actually get rid of the gold standard, because there's people speculating against the dollar. In his speech, he mentions the speculators against the dollar because people are buying, they wanted their gold. They said, hey, you guys have a lot of programs going on. You guys are going to space. In the 60s, there was a huge boom, right? And they were going to war in Vietnam.
If you look at today's market, in general. It could be anything, right? Like we had the whole and it still makes me laugh every time I think about it. The whole was it the GameStop stock
Oh
and
yeah, yeah,
AMC and all that. I mean, that's all market manipulation driven by, you know, social media and everything that goes on behind closed doors. But the same stuff was also happening after the end of the gold standard in 1971.
right.
And that's why we had things like the Hunt brothers run up of silver in 1980, where silver unnaturally went from next to nothing to $50+ an ounce. So it was kind of like this mad rush to, you know, A, obtain more silver, and B, trying to flip it so that way you can make the kind of money that was being, you know, traded at that time. But you know, after the all the press had come out, all the investigations had been completed. Yeah, the Hunt brothers got popped, and as a result, the silver market popped as well. So we've seen kind of like this precipitous drop, you know, in like 1981, 1982, and silver flatlined at like $2-3 an ounce for the longest time up until like 2008 when the Great Recession had hit the US and parts of the world as well. And that's when we saw silver run back up, but more of a natural progression because that's something that people wanted to dump their money into as a safe
Yeah,
haven.
yep. That's always during financial crises, gold and silver
Yeah.
seem to be safe havens where people want to park their money into. Even silver stocks and gold stocks are a decent hedge against that as well. But at the end of the day, do you think housing is probably the best investment
Well,
currently?
some are under the impression that the housing market is on the verge of a pop.
Mhm.
I don't know if that's the case. I'm not a real estate investor or anything like that, but I do know there's more desirability to have real estate these days. And you know, even as other things have dropped, and we also seen a correction in crypto.
Mhm.
You know, the housing market has continued to stay strong, and I think that's all a result of just the change in the dynamic of people and how they work. People are now able to work from home. You know, so you know they're leaving places like, say, the San Francisco Bay Area or Los Angeles, and they're moving to better areas where it's less populous, housing's cheaper. So you're going to have like larger, deeper pockets of like a building, burgeoning real estate market, like Dallas, Fort Worth, Denver, where I live at, Sacramento. We've seen people migrate over from San Francisco to live in this area. It's made houses, well, not as affordable as they used to, but we're seeing that all across the US. It's not every place, but you know, these pockets where maybe some of the companies that move to,
Mhm.
you know, that's where we're seeing more of a presence in the real estate market boom.
I think a lot of it is FUD as well,
Yeah.
because there was a lot of like news and articles I remember about how BlackRock and other big hedge funds were buying up whole neighborhoods, and I think that
Mhm.
got people to panic buy houses because they'll feel like they're not going to build more houses because you have silver, I mean, you have wood going up, lumber going up, all these materials going up, and now you got all these hedge funds buying up real estate, pushing the prices up even further, and people who just don't want to be renters forever, they just got into the FUD and they basically got into brutal mortgages that you
Yeah.
can't get out of.
Yeah, well, I could say this right now. There isn't that brutal like 3 and 5 year arm that kind of did a number on the real estate market back in '08.
Mhm.
The adjustable rate mortgage was not a friendly thing to people that were buying homes that were to this day still vastly inflated.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's pretty crazy just to see how things are kind of moving along, and you know, the whole FOMO FUD. You know, I kind of sound like Rudy from Alpha Investments. It's so
Yeah, he,
funny.
he mentions FUD all the
He
time. Yeah,
he brings that up quite a bit,
yeah.
and you know, he's right. You know, it's like when investing in the opportunity to spend your money becomes an emotional attachment,
Mhm.
people make irrational decisions. You
Yeah.
know, I would I personally go and find a house in a hot real estate market today. I don't know. I'm kind of like 50-50 on it. I'm sure if like my wife's work had moved to one of these metropolitan areas, we might be open to it, or we might just rent. I'm really not as certain as I was probably 18 months ago, where homes were 40% less in value. So
Yeah. Oh, that's crazy. Especially in places like California where you are, and places where
yeah,
I am, like in Toronto, which is absolutely insane. Probably one of the craziest housing markets in the world.
I can imagine. Yeah, Toronto, Quebec, and a few other areas. I'm sure I've been just bustling.
Yeah, it's not just Toronto. It feels like it's the only real big city in Ontario. Everything just keeps moving outward from Toronto. So
Yeah.
that real estate boom just was like a catalyst. It was like a nuclear bomb that just kept going from like town to town to township. And it's almost impossible to find any house in Ontario for under like 250,000.
Well, is that Canadian?
Yeah.
Okay. I was going to say that's still somewhat reasonable.
Oh, but what I mean, I'm talking like a shack though. I'm talking like
Oh, a
it's a
shack.
foldable.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm not
All
talking
right.
when I say 250,000, I'm not talking like a house. It's you would see it and you would be like, is there raccoons living in the ceiling? What's happening? And if it's in Toronto, or no, it wouldn't be in Toronto for that price, but somewhere in Ontario, we got a lot of raccoons. We got a
Yeah.
lot of raccoons here in Toronto too, but
Well, if
overall
it were up
Ontario.
to me, I'd hold out for the double wide shack.
Yeah, there you go. At that point, you might as well just get a box home and just call it a day. You know,
Yeah, yeah.
it's
Like what's his face? The Elon Musk, doesn't he live in like a converted 200 square foot home on wheels or something like
that's what he
that?
says. That's what he
Yeah.
says. Yeah.
Apparently it works out, right? It's got solar power and
Yeah.
all that great stuff.
If it works for a multi-billionaire, maybe it's okay for a normal person as
Well,
well.
he is the self-proclaimed minimalist, so
Yeah,
we'll
that's
just take.
true.
He's working on his space shuttle venture or whatever he's got going on. So
Yeah, like minimalism is an interesting concept too. I assume me and you were probably the opposite of a minimalist. Like I try to like not be a massive consumer, but at the same time, we're both collectors. So it's impossible for us to really be minimalists. If you're stacking silver coins, that's kind of anti-minimalism. I'm stacking magic cards and other collectibles like comic books and action figures. It's very hard for me to be considered a minimalist in this type of environment. Although if I had a house that was like a moderate size, I think I'd maintain it. Like I wouldn't go crazy. I wouldn't try to fill every room with magic cards or anything like that. I'd try to be pretty reserved on that. But so for you, do you have a storage? Where do you store a lot of your silver coins? Do you do it all at home, or do you have a storage locker somewhere else, a unit?
well, with a lot of my like higher value stuff, obviously you have a safe deposit box, and
Yep.
that's what I use.
At a
You know,
bank.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah. But what I found, because it used to be an issue when I've like overbought, and I would buy anything. I would buy full bags of older wheat cent pennies, and all sorts of things, stuff that I could go through at a later date, but they would
Hmm.
just sit like in a corner of a garage and they would just pile up. I became a little bit of a hoarder like 10 years ago,
Yeah.
and I've dialed back on a lot of that, only because my wife said I had a real problem, and it kind of forces your hand to make
Yeah.
drastic decisions. But sometimes it, instead of buying a lot of little things, I ended up scaling back and then buying more meaningful stuff. As opposed to buying that $10 thing, I went and bought a $500 thing. It's
Hmm.
less content, less quality, less storage. It just makes it easier, which brings me to my next point, and it doesn't matter what type of collecting you do, identifying exactly your budget in things helps. Um, do you covet having quantity of something? So if you like say only had $100 to spend
Hmm.
on magic cards, would you rather buy a bunch of something, or
Hmm.
would you buy kind of like some marquee pieces if you were like an investor or collector and you just wanted like one of something?
Yeah,
It, you know,
that's an interesting question because it depends on what type of Magic Gathering collector or if you're in MTG Finance, there's two things you could do with that. You could spec on a card that's cheap that you think is going to go up in price. So you try to buy a whole store out of that card. If it's $1, you think it's going to go to 2 or 3, and then you'd flip that. Or if you're an investor, I think it's a better idea to go after like a marquee card or something that's a reserve list card that is probably going to at least maintain its value. And if not, it's going to go up over time, most likely scenario. Because at the end of the day, let's be honest, they're going to continue to print money, and that money's going to have to go somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, does that mean me buying 100 copies of Cordial Vampire from MH1 was a bad idea?
I don't know. Maybe. If you have decks for it, maybe it wasn't, right?
Yeah, well, it's more of a spec on, what we see from Crimson Vow, which I am still kind of like, I'm kind of in awe that Wizards would even release 2 sets back to back.
Yeah, and
my wallet's hurting, buddy.
I know, and of course it has to be in the fourth quarter, right? They got to put their profits up. I mean, I get it. It's okay. It's just funny though that when it comes to specs, I call it. There's these certain specs that I call the no-brainer specs, where if you know Wizards is going to go back to a certain plane where there's going to be certain creatures of certain tribes, just buy playable cards that are cheap for that specific tribe. Like a lot of the market mover videos recently. The werewolves. It's just like it was like a no-brainer. If you just would have bought like a bunch of werewolves from Eldritch Moon, just go through the set, find ones that you think are undervalued, and they all pop. All of them have went up by like 25% just because people are like speculating, well, there's gonna be a new werewolf commander or something like that, and we're probably gonna get more werewolf tribal. We're getting more people into the game. People are gonna want to be building these decks, and those are like the no-brainer specs. The other specs that are a little bit more intense would be ones that would be like 2 cards that match well together in a combination. Those are like the specs that I try not to do much of, because if you get that wrong, then usually those are the ones that you lose the most money on.
Yeah.
But if you get them right, you make a lot of money. But I just say do the brainless ones, just look for tribes and mechanics.
Exactly. Yeah, for the very first time, I've actually never owned this card. I picked up my first copy of, Olivia Voldaren?
Oh, yeah,
it wasn't the original Innistrad copy. I think it was a Modern Masters 2017.
It's the Masters one. Yeah.
I'm sitting here, I'm looking at this thing. I'm like, this is pretty cool. Because I had some sort of intention on building a vampire tribal type of deck. I don't know if I'm going to do kind of like a Rakdos style where you're kind of draining your opponent, of life. But I was like, I'll try it out. And I was use her as kind of like a commander. But yeah, it's pretty crazy. The kind of cards that have been kind of buried in the lore of Magic that all of a sudden have like this revival when a set comes out. It's just crazy the way that works.
Oh, and it gets more people excited to go back to the LGS and play.
Yeah.
Any sets that are recurring, there's a lot of memories people have, and the nostalgia kicks in. They remember their first time playing Innistrad at a pre-release. They remember, the next time they played, if they're in the game that long, for Shadows, and now they have another one to look forward to. So it gets a lot of people excited for the game. So now I actually want to bring it back to Silver a little bit.
Sure.
Because Magic the Gathering actually released a few Silver pieces. Do you remember the Jace the Mind Sculptor from 2013?
Yes.
When Hasbro released? Do you have that one?
I don't have any of the Magic the Gathering Silver Bullion pieces.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I've seen them. I'm like, oh, well, but respective to what they were being sold for on the secondary market, it didn't make any sense to buy it. Any sort of like modern commemorative type of spec is usually a bad idea. These are coins that drop, over time, and then they'll kind of settle,
if it hits a certain, but if it does hit a certain price, because obviously you like Magic and you're into collecting silver, would those be like pieces you would acquire at one point?
Yeah, if the price is right.
Do they have a population? Do they have a population report for those? Sometimes they'll have a population report.
If they're graded, yeah, there will be population reports.
Okay.
But some of those type of pieces, and normally those type of coins are produced like at the Australian mint or some other facility that's, a worldwide mint, those generally have a really low mintage, like 2,000 pieces, 3,000. It's very limited, but you also have a very limited audience for those coins.
Yeah, that's true. I guess if
Yeah.
you weren't a fan of Magic the Gathering, it's probably one of the least likely coins you'd be looking to purchase just based on the amount of silver in there.
Yeah.
So what is your favorite? Since we just talked about Innistrad, what would you consider your favorite all-time Magic the Gathering set, or set that you have the most fond memories playing and collecting?
Well, I hate to kind of like drum up like the past and all this. Actually, it might be okay. So that way, some of you that are relatively new at the game or have only been around a few years, I played all the way back when packs of antiquities were like $8.
Wow.
And even then, I was a kid that was like barely 16 years old. I had a $20 a week allowance, and thankfully my parents gave me that. But there was only so much that you could buy with $20 a week. And at the time, I was really heavy into comic books, and we also did video games, me and my brother. But I distinctly remember starting to play Magic, and the real reason I started was we had made a pretty sudden move. We lived on the East Coast, and we had moved out here on the West Coast in Nevada during my high school sophomore year. And that's kind of like a very traumatic like time to just up and move, because all these friends that you've made for like 3 years, you're like, oh yeah, they're all gone. But I met a play group. Ironically, I ran into them in a classroom where they teach driver's ed. And I was trying to sign up for driver's ed that year. And I had met all these guys, and they were playing a really cool like card game. I'm like, oh, what do they got going there? And one of the guys said, oh yeah, we're playing Magic. You want to sit down and see how it all works. And I thought it was pretty cool. And one of the guys handed me a deck, and you're like, hey, let's get you started. And it was on that very first day. I was like, man, this is really cool. And it's even though packs of like unlimited were like $5, I picked up a few of those. I thank God to my lucky stars I had the ability to buy a pack of unlimited. Didn't get anything super spicy or anything. I think I ended up with and I still have it. I have an unlimited Scrubland
Nice.
pulled out of there.
That's pretty good.
So,
That's pretty good.
yeah, it's not bad. It's got a little wear and tear because it was a very well played card. But yeah, that was one of my first experiences. I was able to buy like Legends packs. I bought a few antiquities. I didn't get really deep and heavy into buying packs until Revised came out. And it was a different experience. It's like, well, at the time, you knew that there was like Black Lotuses you could pull, and Moxes and Chaos Orbs, and like all that went away. So there was a little bit of criticism among players, like, oh man, they took all these great cards out, even though they were busted as all get out. And me at the time, I had only been playing a few months, so I started to buy a bunch of Revised, and I ended up with quite a nice collection of Revised. And also at that same time, the Dark was out, but you began to see the prices of the packs start to jump up. Like out of nowhere, Revised packs were like $10. And I was like, man, it's getting really hard to justify buying any packs because it's getting so expensive. But it was also at a time where you could buy like a Black Lotus they had one at my comic shop for like $250. And I wish I would picked it up and saved the money for it, because we know how that fairy tale ended today. But I know this is kind of hard to believe, but there was kind of a low point in the game when it was right after Fallen Empires had come out. People saw how powered down, in their opinion, how powered down the set was. And then Ice Age came out, and it was like a huge set. And it wasn't nearly as good as some of the older sets, of course. But there was a period of time between kind of like when Ice Age, I think 4th edition had just came out as well. but it was like a good like 8 to 9 months before the next expansion came out. And people were just waiting, or like, man, when is this new set going to come out? You know, they're sick and tired of playing their Fallen Empires, their fourth edition, and their Ice Age cards, because, you know, they were all powered down and they weren't nearly as exciting to play with. And it was pretty crazy because my local comic book shop that sold all this stuff, he's like, yeah, I mean, the sentiment in the game and the hobby is very low right now. You know, there's even been some talk of, you know, possibly cutting their WPN contract or whatever it was, so that way they didn't get any more Magic cards. And there was a lot of other card shops that were kind of following suit because of just this big, long kind of delay in getting, was it Homelands?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Homelands was the next one that was coming out. Toward about the time when it did come out, they delay it 2 weeks, and then they would delay it another week, and you know, it just became this thing. But that, sorry about the long drawn out history. My favorite set that I think as soon as I bought it and I instantly fell in love with it was Mirage.
Oh,
I just love the whole desert theme. Some would even kind of compare it to, you know, what you would see in the Africa, you know, it's just a really cool theme set. Enjoyed it quite a bit. I love the artwork on there. The cards were fun to play with.
Yeah. The lands are beautiful in Mirage. Like, stunning.
They are lands. Exquisite. They're a work of art. A lot of John Avon lands in that set were just amazing. So, but yeah, it's where I began to feel like, oh, I like the direction where the game is turning. You know, Wizards of the Coast was trying different new things at the time, and you know, and the sets were getting better. Visions and Weatherlight came out like right around the same time. They tightened up their schedule for these expansion releases, so you didn't have to wait, you know, 8-9 months for the next set. Things were just beginning to roll, and then, you know, the card shops were beginning to, you know, host their funky, you know, standard 1.2.8, you know, format or whatever it was back then. But yeah, it was a lot of fun, and I attribute it to Mirage. But, you know, like most Magic players, I got out of game after Urza's Destiny, and because I was in college, I couldn't afford to play the game and do any of that stuff. And I came back during the tail end of the Lauren block before I went to Alara. So I got back in for about a year, and then I got back out after Zendikar, and then came back at pretty recently. I think it was Kaladesh was the last set or something that came out, and that I came back right then. So
well, Kaladesh was a good set to come back into it, though, with all the masterpieces.
Yeah. Well, I didn't get super immersed in the Kaladesh block. I did a little bit of the Amonkhet era of stuff, and pulled a couple of the few weird, funny invocation cards out of there. Yeah. You know, I thought, oh, that's pretty neat. I can't understand what it's saying at the top, but
but they're shiny.
Which I guess is everybody's issue, because the design and the way it's all laid out on there.
Yeah, it was the reason why they discontinued the masterpieces. There was so much hate on those specific cards, and then after, I mean, maybe they did it. Maybe they did it on purpose, because remember, right after that, they started basically selling us directly. What was it? The Mythic Edition boxes first.
Right. Well, that was from what was that? Ravnica, right?
Was the first, it was Guilds, Ravnica Legions, and War of the Spark. But it was right after, it was the box toppers. So essentially, they found a way to repurpose the lottery cards to, you know, get more money from us players and collectors, because you'd be opening a ton of boxes for standard, and it would lower the prices of the singles. Which, if you're trying to play standard, that's actually a good thing.
Yeah,
and you'd have collectible items in there too, like lottery cards. So it was kind of a win-win, but for Wizards, I think they found ways to make more money from these cards. And, you know, you can't really fault them. They are a company. At the end of the day, they have to think about their profits.
Well, I want to ask you, because Wizards has been kind of playing the same tune for the last few
Mm.
years in terms of trying to inject more collectible level of cards. Do you think that Wizards has probably worn out this particular ship with the collector booster boxes and the
Hmm.
extended arts and all that stuff? What are your
Well,
thoughts on that?
well, let me tell you about Image Comics in the '90s. No, just kidding.
You don't have to.
Yeah,
I've
yeah,
had the Shadow Man and
yeah, yeah.
all those Spawn.
All the
All those
shiny
Spawn's awesome.
variants.
Spawn's
Yeah,
tight.
Spawn
So
is great, but
yeah,
I do. A part of me does worry for like the health of the game. Selling things as a collectible rather than just focusing on the game itself is a little bit worrisome.
yeah,
Like it's like same thing as I like to bring up Image Comics as a joke, but at the same time, like story wise, a lot of those comics are trash. I remember my older brother would read a bunch of Image Comics, and I would read them as a kid, and I was like, "Give me Spider-Man," not just because I liked this character Spider-Man, but the stories were there. I just couldn't follow. It's just a bunch of guys with pouches and guns, but then they had like number one. It was always a number one. Every week there's a new number one, and because they knew number one sold, it was like if you put number one on the comic, people they wanted the first issue just in case, but then they never really actually followed through with good stories and keep that building.
and what
So
wasn't that a period in comic book history where they began to kind of push like the variant covers, like with the
yep,
embossed
that's
and the
exactly what I
glow
was
in the
just gonna get
dark,
to.
and
Yeah,
yeah,
that's exactly.
I remember was it it was probably the most egregious kind of like variant cover. It was what, Turok #1 with the chrome insert that they put in there.
Oh yeah.
I was like, we've hit a new low in all this. That you were exactly right, Matt. The stories left a little bit to be desired. I don't think the writers really pushed kind of like the type of stories that we see in today's comic books.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, I think with Magic, um, I'm a little bit kind of scared of the direction that they want to take with the paper side of things.
Oh yeah. Mhm.
Although we've seen, I think, a prelude of what we're seeing in their ultimate goal, and that's to really push the digital side. I mean, if you're going to release this massive historic
Yeah.
Horizons digital only set for Arena, I mean, that is a huge cash grab right there, just to push that. And I'm kind of waiting for the day that they decide to I guess implement or change their was it MTG online or whatever, to
Oh
play like
yeah.
modern,
Yeah.
to do kind of like an arena
Version of
swap
it.
over.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. All they really need to do is just go to more formats, keep going down the list. And next thing you know, they've got vintage and old school and MTG Arena, and that's basically that's the nail in the coffin for Paper Magic.
yeah, yeah. I
It's a,
have you noticed, because everybody talks about it obviously, but the dwindling power creep in today's sets. um
yeah,
do you do you think that might scare off current existing players, or what are your thoughts on that?
I
Or is
think
that
we're
is that just a standard cycle?
I think it could be Magic. What is it? 30 years old about now. If you
Yeah,
look back at the cycles, I feel like we're kind of in like a Homelands Ice Age cycle right now,
yeah.
where they are powering down. I mean, look at Throne of Eldraine. What a set! That set was ridiculous. Like my brother, he's building a few Pioneer decks right now, and I was going through them, and almost every one of the decks were like half of them were Throne of Eldraine cards, because it was just such a powerful set. Even the uncommons, like all that glitters and everything, there was some really mystical dispute is another uncommon that's really powerful in Throne of
Yeah,
Eldraine.
yeah,
I think they kind of peaked there. The amount of bans that they had from Throne of Eldraine with Oko and Once Upon a Time was another card that was banned. It was only a matter of time where they started to power down. And I actually think that's one of the reasons why they brought back the core sets, was actually to kind of power things down slowly as well. Because they remember they got rid of them, then all of a sudden they brought them back, and now we kind of see
yeah.
these powering down, and now we're seeing like Dungeons and Dragons, which is replacing core sets, which is one of the weakest sets I think I've ever seen for Magic. I mean, it's almost like Dragon's Maze weak.
And it's really unfortunate. I think the one thing holding back um, Adventures in the Forgotten Realm is that it's kind of almost like a standalone,
Yeah.
based off of the different like mechanics, the dice rolls, the few very other things don't have a lot of crossover to um, other sets and other different types of deck systems. I think where you're going to see kind of like maybe future potential is when they do another D&D part 2 or in a part 3, and
In the future,
kind of build on the certain mechanics that kind of left us hanging. Like I was playing around with this commander deck, the pre-con, for one of the D&D sets, and there was like a good probably 5 or 6 cards in there, because it's like equipment based. It's kind of like a Voltron style of deck that they put into $30 ready to go and play. It's actually quite entertaining, but I would get to these cards where it prompted you to roll a D8, and I'm like, I don't want to play that card. Only because it seems like it doesn't fit the deck, and even though it's made for the deck, it feels out of place. And that was one of my cuts. I ended up putting other things in there, but yeah, it's kind of tough, man.
There's a lot of specific cards for like that you could only really use in that set. I remember even when I was drafting it at a store, I was like purposely avoiding cards that had the D20 roll that and like go into the venture into the dungeon. And I know like you should probably just figure it out, like play it. Maybe it's going to work for your deck. But there's just too many new mechanics. And that's why it's kind of ironic, because it's replacing a core set, and core sets were the sets that were known for having evergreen mechanics, lifelink, flying, haste, the most basic type of mechanics to get new players into the game. And Dungeons and Dragons was kind of like a missed opportunity in that sense. I think it was designed not to get new players into Magic the Gathering, but to actually get players who play Magic into Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think D&D has such a wide kind of like retail support, that's also another big money maker for Hasbro.
Yeah,
as far as their different I guess sub companies or whatever. But I think that the dungeons seemed very interesting, but I think the small sample size that they added in there just seemed very underwhelming. The few dungeons that you could test through. I was like, man, that's really not good. Why would you play that?
Yeah, just 3. I think there's just 3, right?
3 dungeons? 3 of them. It's like, oh yeah, you get to scry when you move, one level, and then another level, give one of your creatures +1/+1 token or counter. It's like, what's the payoff? I'd rather see them build like one really giant dungeon and make a couple variants of that where you have to go through like 40 levels and
and then you win the game.
Maybe that could possibly be a different kind of like game type of experience, to join in with Commander and Pioneer. How about do the dungeon format or whatever it is? I don't know.
It could be a whole other format. You're right.
Yeah,
and it's like there could be alternate win conditions in there as well in those dungeons. Yeah, that could be things that like we should be working right now for Wizards of the Coast, giving them some ideas in the board meeting. There you go.
Yeah. If you don't mind working for minimum wage, right?
No, well, I've heard the stories. Anyways, I don't want to keep you too long, Sean. I'm just so thankful that you came on and chatted with me during this Mattcast. And to everyone watching, please, if you are interested in silver coins, if you want to find out more about that collectible market, check out BlueRidgeSilverHound's channel, and I'll leave that in the description as well for you guys to find. Thanks again, Sean.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you, everyone.
All right, and I will see you all again in another video. Take care. Being a patron will help me produce more market movers and add to the funds that I will use for my random buys, and also to my coffee fund, because I drink a lot of coffee for these videos. And here you can see a link below in the description that will give you all the tiers and what you get in each tier. So I hope you guys click and think about joining. And with that, I'll see you next video. Think about supporting the channel in that way. If not, subscribe, like, leave a comment, and I will see you again in the next video.